So yeah, we've got Zena from ideasUK. So we're really happy to have her here to give her this talk on ideation to implementation. So yeah, I'll hand over to you, Zena. And yeah, thank you very much.
Well, morning all, and if Fran's still on the line, I thought that was a great talk, Fran, and a great start to the session. So thank you very much for that. So I'm here from Ideas UK, and effectively Ideas UK is a not-for-profit network organisation that really supports organisations to develop the processes that support innovation. So to really harness the power of ideas for beneficial impact. And just to give you a little background on me and make sure that I can use the system okay, hopefully you can see my slides because I live down in Devon, which has been quite fabulous for lockdown in many, many ways. But equally, my broadband is a bit flaky. So if at any point you can't hear me or you can't see my slides or you just wonder, is she talking to me or does she just sound like a Dalek? Then just shout at me or drop something into chat, as it does sometimes happen. But just to give you a little bit of background, so I started, well, and worked 20 years actually for a pharmaceutical company. So I guess on the dark side, as many of you may see it, for MSD, always on the commercial side of the organisation. And one of my roles whilst in that organisation was to launch an innovation process, because whilst we can be quite creative on the research and development side, actually on the commercial side of the organisation, we pretty much still do things the way we did 20 years ago. So that's when I first became involved with innovation, and I also held roles as a UK change manager and did quite a lot of project management work as well. And back when I launched the innovation programme, I also found an organisation called Ideas UK, who I now work for, who very much supported me to develop the processes that sit behind our innovation programme that was at MSD. So for the last 5 years, I have been the operations director for Ideas UK and spent a lot of time working with a multitude of different organisations, mainly larger organisations in both the public and private sector at home and abroad. And really, I guess I'm never going to say I'm an expert in this, but just working with lots of organisations has given me an insight, I guess, in what works well and what doesn't work so well in this space. I also now sit on the British Standards Institute creating the Global Innovation Standards, so ISO 56002, which is in innovation management, was launched last year. And I guess the other arm I have is I'm a qualified emotional intelligence practitioner, so really did find it interesting what Fran was saying about those human factors as well, and also the conversation we've already had about kind of changing behaviours and changing mindsets. So today is well, I've titled it implementation or innovation to implementation. And I guess we've had a couple of things already come up about what people want to know. So funding sources was one of them. I'm going to tell you now, I'm afraid that's something I'm not covering, and I'm going to leave that to you guys for later in the week. We've had changing mindsets, but if there is anything else that you would like to know in this kind of field of innovation or creativity, anything you'd like me to cover, then do pop anything into that chat function and I'll pick that up. But I thought we'd just start with a couple of definitions because I think this often gets a bit confusing. So what's creativity and what's innovation? And for me, I'm going with a couple of basic definitions. So creativity being the generation of new ideas. So it's just about those ideas, those thoughts. But innovation is actually implementing those ideas. So it's the implementation of creative ideas in order to generate some sort of value. Now, often that is through income or reduced operational costs, but it can also be things like culture, a change in culture, people's happiness, for example. So creativity is that generation of ideas. Innovation is very much the implementation of those ideas. And there really is kind of this whole gamut of innovation. And, often people think, well, I'm not going to come up with the next Apple iPhone. Well, yes, okay, you may not. That's right at one end of the spectrum. When the first iPad was launched, that could be seen as breakthrough innovation, or Airbnb that completely disrupted the hotel industry. That's down at your breakthrough end. However, the majority of innovation really takes place at this incremental stage, and at the very basic form is just about doing things better today than we did yesterday. It's all of those tiny little changes, those little time-saving things that we can adopt that really do add up into a bigger picture, particularly in larger organizations. And down at that end of incremental innovation, it's very much easier. Often it's with our own control to adapt and change. It's sometimes shorter term, but it's very much smaller investment too. So we're not going financially bankrupt by changing a process, for example, or we hope not to at least. So I want you to think not just about these totally revolutionizing ideas, but more about that incremental innovation. What can we do differently that can benefit our patients, that can benefit the hospitals we work in, for example, even benefit ourselves? And whilst this may be a bit of a depressing note to start on when we're all excited about innovation and getting our ideas off the ground, I think it's important to just look at why most products fail, why new products fail. And I'd also maybe like you to tap in the chat function. What percentage of new innovations do you think fail? So what percentage of innovations do you think fail? Because unfortunately it's quite significant. Oh, 92%. That's high, Tammy. Anybody else got any further advances, higher or lower than a 92? 75 to 80, bit bang on there, Chris, I'll give you that. 45, that would be lovely, Carol. Unfortunately, it is a bit higher, so it can be anywhere. It's a broad figure between 60 to 80%, depending on kind of which research you look at, but certainly a very high percentage of innovations do fail. And often that is because, as you can see here, that there is no market need, that perhaps we haven't got the right team. Very much talking to the human factors, it's a user unfriendly product. It's got poor marketing. We've ignored our customers. So there's quite a few people-y factors here. And certainly the biggest reason also is not having that market need. So sometimes we think we've got a great idea. You've seen the people on Dragon's Den that think they have the best idea. They've sunk their life savings into it. And actually they have what they think is a great idea, but they really haven't established that market need. So we're going to talk a bit more about that market need today. And really what I'm planning to share with you today is kind of this process for innovation that comes from that ISO guidance I talked about earlier. And this is very much, although I've drawn it as a linear process, it's very much a non-linear process. You can go backwards and forwards between all these stages. So the first step very much is identifying the opportunity. So I get shivers down my spine when somebody says, let's do some blue sky thinking. Let's just come up with ideas. And you're like, okay, how? It's not always the easiest to just come up with an idea. It's much more easy if we can really identify actually what's going wrong or what's this massive opportunity and then solve for that problem. So we're going to talk quite a bit about identifying that opportunity and how we do it. What are we really trying to achieve with our ideas? Creating concepts is pretty much what it says. It's the ideation bit. It's coming up with ideas, often seen as the fun bit, the creative bit, the brainstorming. And we'll look at a couple of my favorite techniques for brainstorming. Then looking at validating concepts. So on this level, it could be tests, experiments, pilots, or just even sense checking with others, funneling down those ideas. If we've come up with loads of ideas, how do we kind of pick our most promising to take forward and develop into a solution? And if it's a fairly simple idea, scoping it out is going to be dead easy. It also can avoid risk, but if it's a bigger, meatier idea, you know, how do we involve people, the right people, to get that solution off the ground, and finally deploying solutions. And I guess this very much comes in with that three-part methodology that Joe introduced with the discover phase being the identifying opportunities, creating concepts, even validating concepts, and then you've got your develop phase and your deploy phase. So it very much ties in with the method that you've adopted in the West Midlands AHSN too. And what I would ask is, if you've got any questions as I go through this, please do add them into chat, or just unmute yourself and ask me anything as we go along. So I'm going to pretty much follow this process, probably focusing more on the first 3 steps, because I'm conscious that you'll cover the latter 2 steps further on. But I thought I'd start with saying that, you know, if you don't believe me why it's so important to spend time on identifying your problem, I thought I'd pick on Einstein. Let's be honest, he's got a million quotes that we all use these days. But certainly one of them is, if he had 1 hour to save the world, he spent 55 minutes defining the problem and 5 minutes finding the solution. And for a little bit more of an up-to-date reference, Steve Jobs, the founder of Apple, if you define the problem correctly, you almost have the solution. And that's really why it's so critical to understand kind of why you're going about this. You know, it is a pretty messy world, innovation. If we're getting people to change the way they behave, adopt new processes, we need to be pretty damn sure that we're doing this for the right reason and not just because we think we've got a great idea. And so how do we identify that area of greatest need? So how do we identify what we should be putting our time and effort in to solve? And I've just jotted down a few questions here, but you also may have some additional ideas, which again, please do add to chat. But where could you make the greatest difference? What factors, for example, have the largest effect on how you're going to perform in the future? Where could you provide additional health benefits to patients? What do you think are the biggest pain points for your customers? And your customers could be healthcare professionals, they could be members of the public, they could be patient groups, they could be patients themselves. But also, where are we wasting the greatest number of resources? So is that on inventory, so we buy in a lot of something when we only need 1 or 2 things? Is it that there's lots of time where people are just waiting in the system? How could we reduce that waiting? So it's really about, you know, understanding where is your greatest area of need, or where also is your greatest opportunity potentially. Maybe a guideline has changed that gives you options to look at new revenue sources, for example. How can you exploit that to its fullest potential? And sometimes it's easier, if we're really familiar with circumstances, to just observe. So again, Fran talked very much on human factors. When she's invited in to redesign a room, for example, she goes and watches. It's called going to Gemba, is another name for it. Basically, go see. So go see and look at what could be improved. Where could it improve? How could you make an area more functional for the individuals that work there, for the patients? So it's all about understanding where those pain points are that you really want to solve. Does that make sense? I'll take it silence and the odd nod as a yes. And also, when you go and see something or you've identified a problem, I guess the other important thing to know about is it really the root cause? So are we just putting a sticking plaster on a gaping wound when it really needs some actual treatment? Or have we got down to what's causing this in the first place? And a technique that's often I use to identify what the root cause is are 5 whys. And as most of you are involved in innovation, I guess this is something that you're probably quite familiar with, but I just thought I'd run through this example for you. And effectively, over in the US, and it is a real example from a while ago, the Washington Monument was deteriorating. So they asked, so what's the problem? Why is the monument deteriorating? And they found that they were using really harsh chemicals to clean the monument. So if you just stopped at that stage, you'd say, okay, well, we need to kind of swap the chemicals that are being used. This is the wrong chemicals for our monument, so let's find some more environmentally friendly, stone-friendly chemicals. But if you ask why, you found that actually the harsh chemicals were used because there was an awful amount of birds, and birds do one thing. So really, again, if you stopped at this point, you say, well, we need to get rid of the birds. We need bird scarers. We need some pulses that keep birds away from our monument. But again, if you ask why are there a lot of birds? Actually, it turns out there's loads of spiders. Well, that sounds a bit strange. So, okay, at this point, you'd go, the solution might be some sort of spidey-side. But you go, why again? Why are there lots of spiders? Well, turns out there are lots of spiders. It's almost like the old lady in the shoe here, because spiders eat lots of flies. And there are lots and lots of tiny little gnats. You go, okay, so really it's a fly spray we need. But ask why once more. And actually, it was because the flies are attracted when they switch the lights on, and they switch the lights on just at dusk. So the actual solution they came up with was to turn the lights on half an hour later when it was properly dark. No gnats, no spiders, no birds, no need to clean the monument with harsh chemicals. So again, if we'd stopped at anywhere down that process, we'd come up with a different solution. The solution, it turned out, was really incredibly easy. But that's why it's really important to understand your root cause and really understand what you're solving for. Because when we don't understand our root cause, we kind of stop halfway down. So although it's maybe a bit of a strange technique, just keep asking why. So, you know, patients aren't being discharged, why? And just keep asking that why, until you get to where you think, actually, this is the answer. And that's the thing that you then start to solve for. So it's just called 5 whys. And why is this so important? Because actually this starts to form your business case. When we talk about changing behaviours, it's really important that we do explain to people why we are doing something. So if you can really accurately understand, you know, what is the problem? When did it start? What's the extent? How big is this problem? What issues is it causing us? If you can explain that to an individual, almost creating your problem statement now, then they're so much more likely to get behind that solution. And again, if you can involve those who are in effect the end users, those where the problem is causing them an issue, right at the start, when you're kind of creating your problem statement, you're really starting to drill down and understand your problem. Again, it's going to make that whole process of buy-in so much smoother as you go along. And whilst it might sound a bit weird to look at success when you haven't even started coming up with ideas, again, by understanding kind of what you're trying to achieve, what specific outcomes are required, it really helps you kind of more focus when it comes to brainstorming. So if you can say, our problem is this, our solution would give us this. So it's not about understanding what that solution is. It's not about saying this is an IT solution or a people-focused solution, but actually just more the vision of what you're aiming for, the benefits that you want this solution to bring. So what would good look like? What would great look like? How do you visualize that success? And how can we maybe even write that kind of goal into more of a smart objective of what we're trying to achieve? Again, it's all about wording. It's about getting people on board with you and understanding what the problem is and what kind of solution you're aiming for to help them kind of focus more when they're looking to brainstorm. So we're already having identified our opportunity, and this is a bit of a whistle-stop tour all the way through the process, looking at creating concepts, which I guess most people would think is the fun part of the whole equation, that generating new ideas doesn't always have to be a new idea either. It can be just a different use for an existing idea or a different use for an existing concept or process. But brainstorming ideas, I guess, is the bit that we all get quite excited about. And this is certainly the bit that I'm going to start getting you involved with. But also when we look at who should be involved, often when we brainstorm, we can do it ourselves. You know, if we've gone to see a problem, we've talked to people, you know, we can come up with those solutions ourselves. So this can be done individually. But equally, I think it's great to get a team involved, to get those diverse perspectives. So ideally people who will be involved in the, problem and solution itself, but also just completely diverse perspective. So people from a different industry to you can bring a completely different concept. They don't come with the same kind of blinkered assumptions that we potentially do because we've been working in the industry for so long. So really think about who you can get involved right from the get-go, who needs to be kind of brought in as you go through, because the earlier you can get these people involved, the easier it is to kind of bring them on that journey, even though I hate the word journey, but bring them on that journey with you and make sure the solution gets implemented at the end. And particularly if you are in a group, then there are, even though it sounds strange, good to kind of set some ground rules, because it's very easy to squash little ideas. And I'm a bit of a gardener, so you might have spied my little tomatoes on my first picture. I'm new to gardening, so when I garden, sometimes when I've planted seeds, I forget what I planted because I'm not always very good at labeling them. And it's a bit of a magical mystery tour or in the garden. So you often need to water and nurture something before you know whether it's going to turn into some beautiful flower or just a great big massive weed. And ideas are very much the same. We often talk about greenhousing when we kind of come up with ideas. It's about nurturing those ideas and just seeing and helping them grow before we, get our pitchfork in and dig them up. So one of the kind of little acronyms around how we can do that is SUN. And the S stands for suspend judgment. So it's really easy when somebody's coming up with an idea that maybe you disagree with, or you think that's not going to work, to, if we're on Zoom, roll our eyes, sigh. Any kind of facial leakage like that can kill an idea straight away. Or even just by accident say, what? That isn't going to work. So what we ask people to do initially is to just suspend judgment. Let people just come up with ideas. This is about our creative phase. So let us not say yes, no, or indifferent at this stage. That comes later in the process. We also seek to understand. We might not get what somebody says initially as an idea. So it's fine to ask questions. So what do you mean by that? Tell me a little bit more. How would that work? So very much open questions to nurture and get that idea out. And then the final thing is around nurturing. And often when people do kind of go through this ideation phase, I'm sure we've all been in a room and stuck little sticky notes all across the walls. And then you might come to those sticky notes in a week or 2 weeks' time and think, what on earth was written on there? So I would also encourage people to write more than just a couple of words or one line. So when you are coming up with ideas, give us enough, give the people enough who are going to be evaluating those ideas to really understand what you mean. When we're doing a kind of a quick fire brainstorm, it isn't about writing War and Peace, but it is about getting enough information on that post-it note or on your online board that you can understand when you come back to it what was meant by that idea. So on to some of these creative techniques. And as I say, one of my favorites, because it's also simple, is Scamper. So I'd like us to practice this together using Smarties as an example. I'm sure looking at that picture, I could have found a better picture of Smarties, but hey, it's what we've got now. So basically, Scamper is a really simple technique that I'm pretty sure you've all come across. I know Tammy and I have used this when we've been presenting together in the past. So the S stands for substitute. So when we're looking at creating new ideas, what could we substitute, for example, in our Smarties to give us a completely different product? So in chat, what could you substitute in your Smarties to give you a completely different product? Chocolate, we could definitely, I don't think anyone should ever substitute chocolate, but yes, the coating. So we could, M&M's, nice, oh, cross branding. So yeah, we could substitute the chocolate and put a nut in there, or some jelly and have jelly sweets. We could substitute the coating and have more like a minstrel. Absolutely. So C is combine. Oh, the shape. So what could we combine Smarties with? What other product, for example, to give us a completely new thing? So this is about combining things together. Smarties and cheese, not a combination I'd relish, but fair enough. Gum, Smartie gum. Ooh. Oh, marshmallow. Now that sounds quite a cool idea. You find quite a lot of actual Smarties. I'm sure they've gone through this process because you certainly get Smarties cakes in the shop now. Smarties seem to go on, oh, licorice. Smartie licorice. Ooh, nice different flavor combination there. And we've definitely got Smarties on brownies. I see quite a lot for artisan brownie sellers, for example. Lollipops, nice. Smartie ice creams as well, yeah. So then adapt. So how could we adapt our Smarties into a different use, or what other use? Well, I guess that comes into use later. How could we adapt our Smarties to create a different product? So I think we already had one about shape. We could change the shape of our Smarties into squares. Melt them. Nice. Never even tried that. It's making me feel like I should now. Size. Yeah, cool. And that actually, the size thing really does bring us onto our M, which is about modify, maximize, or minimize. So how could we create, for example, oh, I think they've already done it, giant Smarties or little mini Smarties, and you still get to sell more with exactly the same product. So that's all about modify, maximize, and minimize. So the P is put to a different use. So what other uses could we put our Smarties to? Oh, I wish diet pills. This would be perfect. Cake decorations, far more realistic, Joanne. Absolutely. So, and if you think also about times of the year, for example, at Easter, they do little eggs with Smarties in. Oh, now we're getting a bit more creative. Pea shooter ammo, board game counters. Absolutely. Oh, up for adding them to cocktails. I think you could probably add them to vodka as well and create some sort of Smarties vodka. Anyway, put to a different use. You've absolutely cracked it. What could we eliminate from our Smarties to create a different product? Don't say the chocolate. The hard shell, the crispy shell. The inside chocolate. Oh, make them hollow. Make them all brown. They often do that, don't they? Limited colours, so they take away the colours, or just have pink Smarties for Breast Cancer Awareness Week, for example. Again, good marketing ploy, plus, you know, being kind as well. And finally, reverse or rearrange. So how could we change the order, for example, of our Smarties? Which pretty much would be to put the chocolate on the outside and the crispy bit in the inside. So it's just a way, you know, when you start on your brainstorming, it's quite nice just to start with just people coming up with ideas. So really just to kind of, if you've described the problem, you've described that goal, what you're looking for, to just get them to start by kind of coming up with ideas. But at some point, you know, people tend to exhaust things they might have walked into the room with. So it's a way to go, okay, so if we could substitute part of our process, or if we could combine our process with another process, or, you know, if we could eliminate something, what would we get? So it's a way of thinking through different options and really aiding that brainstorming process. So another one of my favourites is around assumption busting. And effectively, that's where we list all the assumptions we have about something and we challenge those assumptions. And I'm just going to explain this by looking at a restaurant. And I've picked this one specifically because obviously with COVID, traditionally you would assume a restaurant experience would mean we have to go inside a building to eat. Now, clearly during COVID, that wasn't possible. So what solutions would you come up with, which you probably already know quite a few because lots of restaurants have done these, if you challenge that assumption that you had to go into a building to eat? So if we can no longer go into buildings to eat, how do businesses remain viable? So again, answers in the chat. I'm loving the Diet Smarties too, Chris. Big tents, takeaways, absolutely, sell online. I mean, let's be honest, there is every kind of thing you could come up with. I mean, absolutely fine dining boxes delivered to your door to cook at home. Personally, if I'm going to spend that much, I really want someone to cook it for me, not do it myself. But yeah, I know that my neighbours had a Rick Stein at home or coat at home. It seems to be an absolute craze at the moment. There's online picnic services. We even had a lobster van in one of the farm shops locally to us. You'll be pleased to know, didn't frequent it, but sounded very posh. So yes, there were a huge number of options that came out when we were forced, in this case, to not be able to go inside a building to eat. But often we do put assumptions around things, and by saying, you know, what is our assumption and how do we challenge that to come up with new ideas? And then we may need to modify some of those ideas, but it's a really good technique if you're really stuck and fixated on one or two things that you can't do, to go, okay, but what if we could do it? And then come up with a list of ideas. And finally, because it just got kind of a lovely name, is the lotus blossom. So the lotus blossom is basically when you start with your problem in the center. So for example, you might, well, I'll go into an example in a minute actually, but you start with your core word in the center and you come up with 8 ways to kind of solve your problem. You then look at each of those 8 ways individually and come up with more solutions around how you can achieve that. So popping on to the next slide with our example, because I thought Tammy would like this with her active fitness. So should I, unlikely, but should I want to get more active? I think, but how am I going to do that? So that's my problem. I want to get more active. So theoretically, I could start running again, I could cycle, I could join a gym. So I've kind of put different things that I could do to get more active. So this not only works with coming up ideas, but actually is a really good problem solving methodology as well. And to be fair, I think creativity, problem solving, for me, they're completely interlinked. So then we take kind of one of our examples. So okay, so I want to start running again. And we kind of come up with a whole heap of ideas of how I can do that. I could run at night, I could run to work, I could run on a treadmill, I could run with a dog, I could train for a race, for example. So you can see that quite easily we've already come up with kind of 16 ideas. And basically you take each one of those things, so exercise at home, for example, what would that look like, and come up with kind of ideas to solve that problem. And certainly if you're working in groups, it's quite a good method, because you could give each smaller group, so each group of maybe 3 people, a kind of a different, I guess, avenue to explore, for example. So again, it's all about giving you different avenues to explore, giving you a bit of inspiration to be able to come up with ideas rather than just going, let's blue sky think. It's how do you get those creative juices going? How do you kind of start with that end in mind and really come up with ideas that are useful rather than just ideas, many of which may not be so useful for you? So any questions so far? If there are, just do add them in chat. So we've kind of looked at identifying opportunities and creating concepts, and there literally are books and books of different creative methods. So often it is about finding a method that you enjoy, that works for you, that kind of stimulates your thinking. But now we're kind of more on to validating those concepts. So which ideas, if we've got, 100 ideas on the wall, which ideas are most likely to succeed, are most likely to give us the outcome that we're aiming for? And I guess one of the simplest things to do is an impact effort matrix or a benefit cost matrix, but effectively to cluster your ideas into the different segments in terms of how much impact you feel they're going to give or how much benefit versus that effort and cost piece. And it kind of gives you these kind of broad buckets, I guess, for ideas. So it's kind of a way to take lots and lots of ideas and bring them down to more a few ideas that you want to pursue. So I think it's quite obvious that top left hand corner, if it's going to give you a high benefit and it's a pretty low effort or cost to implement, then they're the ideas that you could pretty much go for. If you've got a lot of ideas in that box, then again we might need to prioritize further. The ones, again, that give you that high benefit, but maybe they're going to take longer to implement, it might cost a bit more money, but if they're really worthwhile, A, it might be worthwhile thinking about a method of how you could do that. Or B, you could almost rescope or reconsider. It could be some additional brainstorming. How do you adapt that idea to make it more viable for you right now? Or is it a topic that you could pursue more in the long term? So you've got your kind of short-term wins and then your longer-term goals. But really, at this stage, anything that falls below the line that's going to give you that low benefit, low impact, this is the time that we start to eliminate those ideas. And I guess the next thing to do when we've still got multiple ideas is really look to prioritize and use a prioritization matrix, for example, which again, many of you may be familiar with. So across the top, we look at our goals. I really relies on us being able to identify a list of business drivers of what we're trying to achieve. So what does success look like? So it could be that actually we really don't have much money, so cost still does have to be an issue. But actually what we're trying to do is maximize our patient benefit or maximize our access to a service. So it's all about identifying earlier that your goal statement, but what are the drivers? What are we really trying to achieve? What does success look like for us? And putting those above the line. They're what we're going to measure our ideas against. We then put the ideas, maybe, the ones that are in the top left-hand corner, we've all agreed that they're ideas worth pursuing. We then maybe pop them down the left-hand side. And often we could use a 1, 2, 3 score or a yes, no, or a 1 to 5, but people do have a tendency to peg in the middle. So I suggest using a 139, and it's very much a scoring method taken from Sigma project methodology, and it really helps you to understand which ideas are the best. So for example, if something only, this idea is going to cost a lot of money, therefore we're going to rate it a 1. It's going to give kind of, it does give some patient benefit, but not dramatic patient benefit, therefore it's a 3. But if it really hits that patient benefit mark, it would be a 9. And the reason you do this 1, 3, and 9 is really so the ideas that hit most of your criteria really do rise to the top. So it gives you a really clear picture on which ideas you want to move forward and which ideas that maybe if we've got time later on, we could come back to, but we really want kind of those top ideas rising to the top and giving us a clear indication linked to what our success factors are of which ideas we're going to spend time developing and delivering in the future. Anyone got any questions about that? It's also possible to put a weighting. So for example, if patient benefit really was your critical driver, you could have like a ×2 weighting. So your 9 actually becomes 18. And again, that would really drive those ideas that give you that extra patient benefit. And as we said, even at this stage, ideas don't necessarily just work. They often need that extra bit of nurturing. That initial flash of inspiration doesn't necessarily become your innovation. And so it's still important to look about what's good of that idea, the potential, what future benefits could come, how is this an improvement? So it's almost like a little checking for ourselves on, yes, we realize it's going to hit our success factors, but still, how can we develop this idea further? And have we still got any like nagging concerns? What else do we need to overcome, and how can we overcome them? So it's at this stage you still sometimes go back to that brainstorming session with the idea that you've got that's maybe partly formed, which you believe is a real goer, and see how could we still improve that further before taking it any further. And I guess when it comes to, validating concepts, it's about who can you validate those concepts with? So again, it comes back to the people. I think this is a good time to talk about people, because actually right from the get-go it's really important to identify the stakeholders and the team that are going to be involved. So who do we need as resources if we're talking about from creating ideas through to the development and implementation of ideas? Who needs to help us? If it's an IT solution, it's so important that we have somebody from IT in the room. Who do we need to take along with us? So again, this could be some of our stakeholders. They might not be directly involved with the idea, but we need to make sure we're communicating with them all along. Who's going to be affected by the change? So who's the end user? How have we got their input? How have we got their involvement? Ideally, right from the beginning all the way through. Who does your innovation benefit? So it could be the patient, for example, whereas the end user might be your nurse or doctor. But equally, who does the innovation damage? So I think we mentioned earlier about, people, if you've changed a process, does that change somebody's job remit? Does that change the way somebody is going to go about doing something? Is there a fear factor involved for them? It could be that actually it's not in their best interest to see your innovation succeed for them personally. So it's really important to think about who could be your blockers in this initiative, and how do you get them on board early? Who can support your innovation to happen, but as I say, who can stop your innovation happening? Really important to identify. And although you might think, well, it's going to be better for the patient, there are still people who might not want that to go ahead. So it's really important that you might not want to put their name on a physical list, but you're conscious of who that could be, and you kind of keep them involved again and keep them bought into your why you're doing this, that real core. And so thinking about how we keep people on board, obviously communicating is our most valuable tool. So I'm going to get you to type into chat again. What objectives are you going to be thinking about? Why are you communicating with people in essence? So any ideas in chat of those objectives for communicating when we're talking about ideation and innovation? What are you trying to achieve? What are your thoughts? To get them on board, absolutely. To understand their motivations and gain buy-in to change, to keep everyone informed, absolutely. Right. Engage, get everyone's opinion, absolutely. So, I've just listed a whole heap of objectives for communicating here too. It's about aligning sponsor expectations, lovely, gaining insight, building credibility, reducing resistance, increasing support, setting expectations. So if you're telling people, I'm going to come up with a new process, a new way of doing this, they're going to be going, and when's it happening? And when's it happening? And when's it happening? And actually just setting realistic timelines and communicating those with people can kind of ease that kind of knowledge gap, to reduce those potential business disruptions. And most importantly, it isn't about telling people, but it's about fostering that two-way communication. So a lot of that in the chat was around engagement, and engagement is very much a two-way communication. So it's not about you transmitting information, but it's about how do you have that open dialogue and that constant open dialogue as you go through the process too. And really what we're trying to do with our communication, bearing in mind we are trying to get something implemented, is have this persuasive communication. And that kind of, I guess, has 4 blocks to it. The first is about establishing credibility. So that could be through the due diligence you've done, the research, even your expertise and experience. providing evidence. So some people are very numbers driven, so appealing to the head, the analytical data behind it, what the current problem is in terms of numbers and what the solution might give them, but also connecting emotionally to them. So we're not only ruled by our head, but we're often ruled by our heart too. And whilst we may need the evidence, actually, how do you tug on people's heartstrings to really explain the benefits for that patient, for example? And then have we got any common reference points that we can bring into this? Any common ground where we use the language that people understand, that, we both might have gone through something before? How can we bring those experiences together to help us make that communication as impactful as possible? So that's kind of the validate concept. So now we're on to develop solutions. And I appreciate that we've not got too much longer, and also that you're going to be covering these in your next session. So I'm not going to talk through this actually, but one of the things I always do when I'm kind of getting to that idea stage is to pull together a business model canvas, which really does capture all your needs in kind of one place. So it looks at the value proposition, why customers are buying. Then on the right hand side, it talks all about the customer and the need you're fulfilling. On the left, it's all about your partners and activities, and below it talks about the costs and revenue. And you can find so many templates if you just Google business model canvas or lean canvas, but it effectively captures in one place all the information about your idea and how you're going to get it into implementation in effect. And again, I know this came up earlier about revenue streams, but I'm not going to touch on this today because I'm sure that the guys will cover this further on. But where are you going to get the money from? You do not want to invest all your life savings in an idea. How can you start small and build up? And again, project management. Once you kind of have your idea, you're moving forward with it, you've kind of done all your due diligence, you might have a project team. So what are the mini milestones you need to check? How are you going to keep yourself to account? How do you know that the kind of whole process is moving in the right direction? It's so important to track as you go through. So when it comes to implementation, how can we pilot? And one of the little concepts that I think is quite useful is around the pocket universe. And Alan Guth, who is actually a physicist specializing in string theory, no less, coined the term pocket universe. And the actual definition is a pocket of space or a region of space over which the environment is uniform. The laws of nature are uniform and the constants are uniform. So how does this apply to us? Well, really, when you're trying to pilot something, how do you find a person, a few individuals to test your idea on, where you're almost getting a relatively, well, we've already talked about the population all being different, but a relatively normal piece of your population. Certainly, if I think about drugs and clinical trials, we'd go for a specific part of the population where we were hoping our solution would, or our drug would work in the future. So what kind of parameters do you need to put in place to ensure that you're really accurately testing the viability of your product with a small group that's very much representative of the large group of where you would want to launch in the future? And I'm going to finish with a little story actually. And this is about two guys who both came up with ideas. So the guy on the left is Paul Jacobs, and he worked for Qualcomm, a large multinational company with money to spend on innovative solutions. And it's back in 2009, and he sees an opportunity to watch TV remotely on a device. They literally spent millions developing a device that you could take with you to watch TV anywhere. So who thinks this is a goer? Thumbs up or thumbs down from the few people that have got videos on. Is it going to be a goer? Thumbs up, we've got a thumbs up or a thumb down. Okay. Now, Nick Swimmerman. After finishing college, he worked in ticket sales for a minor league baseball team, and he started to think about how people bought shoes. So particularly trainers in this case. It was back in 2000, so the internet was, firmly here, and he wanted to sell shoes online. So he developed his own little web page. He used to go to his local store, take pictures of the shoes that were in stock, stick them on his website, and invite people to place an order. He'd then literally go to the shop, buy the shoes, package them up, and post them to the customer with a small markup for his time. Thumbs up or down? What do you think? A thumb up there. Nice. Okay. So let's see what happened to these guys. So here we have Paul. So the catch here was you had to have a separate device. It was a good theory. Only 2% of mobile subscribers watch live TV. So there was huge potential. It was almost that kind of cusp. So great idea. We're going to watch TV mobile, but by having to buy their device, not great. And in 2011, so just 2 years later, they had to shut down the service, refunding customers $800 million lost, because obviously iPads came along and we watched TV on our iPads instead. So it was that device. So whilst the idea was right, the concept was completely wrong, or the problem was right, I should say. The idea was wrong. However, our little guy, Nick, who took the low risk approach, literally setting up a website in his garage effectively, or his bedroom, in 2000, he'd changed the name from, well, shoe site to Zappos, and it was worth 1.6 million in revenue. Come 2009, Amazon acquired it for 1.2 billion. So just by starting small and building up, it certainly can have a massive benefit in terms of that proof of concept, that pocket universe, that testing your concept before investing money. And however, start small, grow, I guess, is the method. And hopefully you'll get great success like ShoeSite did.